Matt, just for the sake of levity, I'm imagining for some reason Bronson doing his Liam Neeson impression and saying, "I will find you, and you will regret it."
I have a special set of skills, and I will come and I will kill you.
Real estate by day.
Yeah, exactly.
Hero
Yeah,
by
and that's one of the challenges with this too. Is it like we think of it like a Liam Neeson thing, but a lot of it is not as it's messier and it's not as exciting and it's not as but it exists, and that's the thing. If it exists, it's something we can do something about.
Yeah, those stats they blew my mind, and everybody I tell does not believe me when I tell them that. So I go Google it, and it's the first thing that comes up, and nobody can believe it.
Welcome to the Liquid Lunch Project. Going from Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, the Liquid Lunch Project.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Project. I am Matthew R. Meehan alongside my partner, the Professor Luigi Rosabianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
Matt, as podcast hosts, we love all our guests equally. But like children, there's always maybe that one or two you love just a little bit more, but you just can't tell the others. Now, for the first time ever today, coming back for part 2 is Bronson Hill. Bronson, welcome back. It was great having you on the podcast last year. You shared a ton of knowledge to the small business community, and we would literally love to pick up, if it's okay with you, where we left off. Welcome back.
Hey, Mike, Lou, so excited to be here. Love talking with you guys. Had a great conversation last time, and I mean, who can't use a great liquid lunch anytime, man? I'm telling you, I love it. Love the show. Love what you guys are doing, and love being back. Thanks, a real honor, man.
So Bronson, just to recap, if you remember, we were talking about inflation because we were in the midst of probably historically high inflation in this country, especially for the recent past. And then we started talking about some really interesting ways of battling inflation through some real estate, and you were giving us some great tips. So since we last spoke, inflation has stabilized theoretically. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the headlines tell us inflation has stabilized, as we were talking kind of before the show. I think you were saying, Mike, that a Big Mac is now $18.50 in any metro area. You pay $18.50 for a Big Mac, if that's a meal or a sandwich. But when I go out, I see it. I see it present, and I think you think of it in an election year. We're recording this. It's there's a desire. What's the incentive? The incentive is to make things appear better than they are. And so I still think, inflation is still 7, 6, 7, 8%. I don't think it's 3%. I think it's hard to say. And also just the fact that inflation may have come down a bit, it doesn't mean it's gone away. So things still cost 50% more than they did before the pandemic. And that comes from currency creation. It comes from overspending. It comes from, like in California where I live, they've changed the minimum wage I think in California now to basically $20 across the board. So when you do that, it's just there's no way for prices to go anywhere but up. So it is different in different parts of the country versus I was actually in Japan this summer. I went in September to Japan, and they have not had inflation for 30 years. They've literally had, I knew a guy that one of my investors lives in Tokyo. He moved there in 1992. He said things were crazy expensive, but they're the same price that they were 30 years ago. And so people now, if there is inflation, they apologize for inflation. We're in a very different place right now. It's just assume that every time you go to the store, the total bill gets higher. Every time you go out to eat, it's more money. And so I think it's affecting everybody, and it's going to continue to affect everybody. And so it's something that it doesn't always affect right away. But I think that we're looking back. I mean, we're going to see this is just, whatever if you call it CPI or the CPI, as we like to say, that whether they put it in their official metric or it's something you just see in prices. Prices are elevated. They're going to continue to rise. And like my friend Mark Moss says, there's 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and inflation.
Bronson, the problem that personally I have with the inflation currently, it's almost disguised in a deceptive way where the bag of potato chips is still the same price, but now it's 2 ounces less. And you go to the restaurant and they sneak in a surcharge, or they tell you it's the same price for fuel, whether it's self-pump or not self-pump, but then they're increasing the price of the Coke inside. So it's sort of like a smack in the face to the everyday consumer to battle inflation. Now, on the flip side, you have to respect the cost of goods may be higher, and there may be higher cost of trucking and shipping and transport and manufacturing. But at the end of the day, it's the poor guy that's pounding the pavement that pays the price. What are you seeing in the real estate world? Because I feel like that attacks inflation in a whole different way.
Yeah, I mean, it does look different in different settings. We're seeing, you mentioned, shrinkflation, where, products get smaller and they're the same price, or they're, things are the same price, but there's all these surcharges or things get added in. In real estate, it's interesting, inflation doesn't affect assets the same. Some assets, are more expensive, some are less expensive. It's interesting. In the last several years, the price of single family housing is up about 2 to 3% total. So even as we've gone, as these rates have risen, I think actually since they started raising rates, this is a couple of years ago when they started raising rates, single families actually stayed because nobody can sell. If you sell now, you're kind of screwed because you lose your 3% mortgage and you have to go pay 7 or 8% somewhere else. Now in commercial multifamily, we've seen areas that in general across the country where it's generally, large multifamilies come down about 20 to 30%. And there's some areas, there's one area of Atlanta that I follow. It's a submarket in Atlanta where the price of a large multifamily from 24 months ago to now has gone down 42%, right? 42%, that's very significant. And so if you only put 20 to 30% down, you basically are negative equity on this deal, right? So that's a challenge. Now, why is that? Why has single family stable? It's all the debt. It's all the cost of money. A lot of commercial debt, particularly multifamily, is especially a value add type of deal where there's renovations happening. Was bridge debt, right? To get into these deals, you had to use bridge debt. It's caused some real challenges in managing the properties because if the valuation is down, no matter what you've done to the property, it's just created some real challenges. A new buyer coming in, if you're below 90% occupied, somebody will have to come and using what's called bridge debt, and they'll have to basically take an interest of 9 to 12%, right? So it means they can pay less for the property and still have a cash flow. So it's kind of this weird time right now where we've seen, not only costs go up in the property, insurance kind of be a mess in some areas where you can't get insurance or it's 2-3 times as expensive. And yet the price for apartment buildings has actually come down, but yet we're just this overall shortage of housing units. So again, it's this weird time. We don't have equilibrium and there's different things happening in different markets. So people ask sometimes, how's the real estate market? And I say, well, which one? Are you talking commercial, single family? Are you talking, in the city, which suburb, what area, warehouse, what asset? So it's a bunch of different assets, and it is kind of hyper local as well to that asset and location.
And Bronson, how much do you attribute like macroeconomic forces, like Gen Z and Gen Y is now in the housing market, right? They need a place to live. That silver tsunami is retiring and selling their businesses. So how much is government influence affecting pricing with rates, but also how much is creating a buoyancy just because of our U.S. macroeconomics rather?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, Lou. It's hard to tell, what is affecting what. It's, all these things happen at the same time, and it's like we're seeing the effects of it, right? So you have inflationary forces, and then you have deflationary forces. So like inflationary would be like we talked about, the deficit, the spending is it's gone from 31 trillion to 34 trillion over a 3 or 4 month period. People don't realize we're just continuing to just deficit spend a ton. And so there's things that, will cause inflation, will cause prices to go up. And then there's deflationary forces. Like you said, that right now, housing is just not affordable. If I'm a Gen Z person, I'm looking around and saying, I don't know how I can afford a house in this market. What can I do? And I don't want to pay this kind of interest rates. What's it going to be? So I think that there's a real challenge there. I think that there are a number of factors going on. I think it is worse in a lot of places than people are acknowledging. I've heard about different industries that have just really getting hit by layoffs and a lot of tech workers. Somebody's telling me there's hundreds of thousands of tech workers got laid off in the last year or so, and just different industries that are really being hit in different ways. And so again, these are things that are not always covered by the media, because the media, no matter what side you look at, there's always biases, and so it's hard to really figure out what's going on. And that it is very similar to the 1970s, where when inflation was high, there was a lot of finger pointing, and there was a lot of kind of kind of misdirection around what's causing this inflation. But it's really caused by, a couple things, right? It's caused by too much spending. It's caused by slowing down, some of the economics slowing down. And when you have high inflation, you've got to take some actions that slow the economy down. And by raising rates, that's a part of that. When you want to slow things down, just start raising rates and keep them higher than they've been for a while, and raise them faster than they've been in the last 40 years, and that will slow you down. It will definitely slow you down.
Well, that'll definitely slow you down. But the other side of that coin is, yes, start raising rates. It's going to make it harder on the consumer, but the government has to stop spending money. There's no reason to raise rates if you're going to continue to print money at the end of the day, right? I mean, if you look at it, the GDP by 2034 compared to the debt is going to be 116%. Not one candidate's really talking about this throughout this whole election cycle. And if you look at the stock market right now, right, it's smoke and mirrors. As of today, the S&P is about to hit an all-time high of 5,000, right? The NASDAQ's already gone. But why is the stock market running up? Well, it's going to melt up. It'll probably melt up this year because, like we said, it's an election year, right? It's smoke and mirrors. It's so everybody out there, when they go and they vote, they look at their 401ks, because the average employee out there has a 401k, and that's how they judge the economy, by what's going on. So their 401k makes them feel a little bit better when they're spending $20 for a Big Mac, but at the end of the day, they're not seeing what comes after that, right? No. Which is going to be capitulation in the marketplace.
Yeah. No, it's really a good point. I mean, and you brought up something true that, the Fed there's the Federal Reserve and there's the Treasury, right? The Federal Reserve is basically saying, hey, we're trying to control, interest rates or whatever. Well, they don't control fiscal policy, right? They don't control the actual spending, right? So they can say, oh, we're going to do this with interest rates, we're going to do whatever. Well, they can't control the spending. And in some ways, this is my opinion, I think they need to have some inflation, because the debt is so high that, if you have a high debt, if you bring inflation up, if it actually kind of, like, let's say they say inflation is low, but it's much higher, they're actually benefiting because they're paying off, they have to pay off all this stuff. And so it kind of actually reduces, over time, I'm trying to kind of find words to say it, but as inflation is high, it basically steals from borrowers. It steals from kind of mom and pop savers, right? It steals from kind of money that's out there. And so they kind of need, if they have high deficits and they have high inflation, it's kind of a way to go and kind of try to balance it out and steal money from people. Now, they're not saying it. There's misdirection. There's things that are there that are causing them not to have to disclose that. But that's really the strategy. And I mean, we go back to Lenin. Lenin in Russia said, the way to, crush the bourgeoisie is between the millstones of inflation and taxation. And so it's kind of this idea, that's where people are getting squeezed. They're getting squeezed in the middle of this. And there's really, the only way to really take advantage of it, like we talked about in our last interview, was to get into assets that are, have some inflation hedged component. And real estate is one of them. If you have real estate, you can own it, continue to own it. If you have precious metals, you have other businesses or things like that will hold it. But you're right, it is. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on. There's a lot of misdirection, and it's hard for the average person to figure out, what's going on, but what to do about it.
I mean, if you look at everything that's going on right now, I mean, if we just took a snapshot of the markets, you think everything's great. But me and Luigi speak with business owners on a daily basis, right? So when interest rates go up, banks tighten up their requirements, right? Because everybody's been fearing this great recession that we're going to go into for the last year. So banks have been tightening up across the board. So what winds up happening is the first thing a business owner does when they need some extra capital is they run that credit card. But they're forgetting that credit card rate's going up too. And that's running at somewhere between 20 to 29% compounding interest, right? Most people in America are doing that right now. And it's causing a lot of defaults on credit cards. Not to mention defaults. I just read another stat. All these EIDL loans that the government gave out, 20% of them are in default. Talking about $60 billion, right? So there's a lot of things that need to be accounted for coming up. And I don't see, and I'm not smart enough to figure out how we're going to get through all this.
Yeah, there's a lot of things too. You mentioned too, we talked about the federal deficit and kind of where we're headed, and over $100 trillion and different things, but there's all the off balance sheet stuff as well. I mean, right now, if you don't, they're not accounting, Medicare, Social Security, all these other unfunded pensions. And I mean, it's kind of a mess. So the idea of like, it's hard to tell what is actually happening, how much bad debt, how much of these things that are out there until it reaches a tipping point, and then it seems to happen all of a sudden. Like in 2008, 2009, this stuff kind of seemed all of a sudden. It was just like there was this loss of confidence. It didn't happen all of a sudden, but for the public, it seemed to happen all of a sudden. All of a sudden in September, there's this big unrest. So we don't know what a black swan will look like. I mean, COVID was definitely a black swan. But things recovered, right? And so,
Right.
I think personally, with all the boomers that are out there retiring, the stock, a lot of them are so dependent on the stock market to grow their wealth. What happens if the stock market goes down 30-40% and doesn't come back? I mean, in 1929, there was such a panic where it went down 89%. I talk about this in my book, 89% within 3 or 4 years, and it didn't recover for 25 years. And that's not even including inflation. So if you adjust for inflation, it could have been 30, 35 years. So if somebody were to have a crash in their stock portfolio now, what would happen? I'm not trying to produce panic or anything. I'm just saying that like these things are out there that could happen. And when things start to really get tossed up in the air, and then the Fed realizes they just don't have control to control asset prices anymore, it could get really ugly.
Well, I mean, there's another flip side of it too. If you look at these pension funds that every major city makes you put money into, so when you retire, there's money there. These pension funds, in some way, shape, or form, own these trophy properties or these skyscrapers of office space, which are now being sold for a quarter of the price they were going for 5, 6, 7 years ago, right? So there's going to be defaults there, right? And if you tell somebody that worked for 25, 30 years that their money's not there anymore, or if they're collecting their pension, you're going to take a haircut of 20% on the amount of money that we give you, there's going to be riots in the street.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, there's actually Henry Ford said that. He said if the public, and this was 100 years ago, if the public understood how the financial system works, there'd be rioting in the streets today. Like people don't understand, and that's why financial education is so important. But the more you learn about it, it's once you if you can look at something and look away, but once you really see it, you can't unsee it. And so guys like you and I, people listening, some of your sophisticated listeners, it's like, holy smokes, like there's so many pieces. It's like, this is I think of the financial world, and Tony Robbins talks about money being a game. It's kind of like the money game. And it's like you're playing this complex board game, and the rules are changing every day, and pieces are getting moved around without you realizing it. And it's just continually moving all the time. And so it's a very dynamic. It's not like, oh, this one thing happens and all of a sudden you do this, or this thing happens over here. And it's like, it's a very dynamic system. And the more you learn about it, the more you realize you don't know, and the more variables you see.
Yeah.
Bronson,
100%.
what's your opinion, Bronson, on what's going on just to take a page from my partner's book, what's going on with the real estate industry? You've got these commercial businesses whose tenants are half occupied, maybe not paying leases and rents for years and years. A lot of their notes are coming due. A lot of these maybe adjustable rates or lower rates coming due. They're not fixed like 15 or 30 years like our residential homes are. We've seen maybe the canary in the coal mine with New York Community Bank just recently. Where do you see the commercial real estate space when it comes to like buildings and a lot of the big assets in the bigger cities?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that depends. There's a caveat there. I think we've seen office struggle because of still COVID, and a lot of people not going back to work as much, or those kind of things. That's definitely struggling. Warehouse and industrial is doing great. Self-storage seems to be doing fine. Multifamily it was the darling child for years. I mean, if you invested in multifamily, especially large multifamily from 2010 to 2020, you were a genius just because you owned it. And then with all of the bridge debt that's out there, we're seeing challenges there. We've got some deals that have fixed debt, some deals that have bridge debt, and we've got a couple of deals that are really struggling where it's unclear. What are we going to be able to do? And we're really seeing, will the lender, and we've seen this in some cases where the lender will simply say, hey, you're doing a decent job of managing this, but you're still not cash flow positive, even at 90% occupancy. Let's just extend the loan terms for you. So that's a best case scenario, right, for people that own multifamily real estate. In worst cases, they could foreclose on a property, right? So there's risks kind of there, or maybe so there's a kind of a mix between where there's capital calls and things that partners coming in and kind of helping make a deal work, and that's kind of in the middle between those two scenarios. But we've kind of been looking. There's people that I know about 2 years ago say, "Hey, I'm starting this special fund to go after distressed multifamily real estate." Well, we really haven't seen it. We've seen kind of here and there, seen some properties, but it hasn't been widespread. And I think the banks in general and the lenders in general are saying we do not want a repeat of 2008, 2009, because they were foreclosing, and not on commercial, but it's interesting. 2008, 2009 didn't affect large multifamily as much, but it really affected single family. But now we're not seeing it in multifamily, or excuse me, in single family because of the low rates, but we're seeing it in multifamily, particularly because of the debt situation. So I think it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, I think the Fed has communicated, hey, we've got 3 rate cuts this year. We're kind of going the other way. So I think there's going to be some distress that comes out, but I also think there's a lot of money on the sidelines, over $6 trillion on the sidelines right now in U.S. investors that are kind of waiting to get back in. I think when rates start to come down, I think it's a great time for people to start getting back in. So I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like. Is that going to mean that we're going to have some more declines? I think it's a pretty good. I have good friends that study this very closely, and I think right now is probably might be the best time to get back into it, because we used to raise way more money in a short amount of time for multifamily, and we haven't done a multifamily in a while. We shifted to other assets, but it could be a great time right now to get into multifamily because there's not as many people doing it right now.
Bronson, no one's ever accused you of sitting on your hands, and I just ordered your latest book, Fire Yourself. I think it's probably on my front porch. Amazon just delivered it a little while ago. I haven't read it yet. So tell us a little bit about Fire Yourself, replace your working income with passive income in 3 years or less. What was the brainchild of that?
Yeah, thanks. So over the years, we've raised about 40 million for different real estate deals. We've done, multifamily, about 200 million there. We have 16 million we've raised for ATM machines, which is kind of a cool story, oil and gas, different types of things. But for a lot of people, I've had over 1,500 of these calls with high net worth investors. And a lot of people own a business, or they're an attorney or a doctor, and they're like, I don't know how do I do this? How do I stop working and I make money? If I sell my business, how do I get cash flow? And if you look at cash flow appreciation, I have a huge cash flow component. This book just really talks about how to get started, what's wrong with Wall Street, why Main Street investments will treat you better, and also how do you vet any deal? What are the things that you do to vet a multifamily deal or an ATM deal? And there's a lot of similar principles. And so this is kind of a how-to guide of how to get started. And one guy, we did our conference called the Advanced Investing Summit in the fall in Los Angeles. We're doing it again this year. And one guy said on the plane, I read your book, and he's like, I was brought to tears because I realized I don't, if something happened to me, or I was disabled, or I died, my family wouldn't be taken care of. I don't really have a way to generate cash flow and cover expenses. And that's really the problem. There's a number of problems with Wall Street, but that's one of the problems with Wall Street. And in the book, I talk about, I was a registered investment advisor, which is called an RIA. I call myself still an RIA. I'm a recovering investment advisor, right? Because I got to see kind of behind the curtain and say, man, there's a misalignment of interest in here. Wall Street gets paid even when an investor loses half their money. And just, there's a study that shows over 50% of fund managers that manage over $100 million have $0 invested in their funds. So there's a misalignment there, right? And so that's why Main Street investments such as real estate, the things you guys are working with as well, just really can, I think, treat people much better.
So what's next, Bronson? You've created an amazing real estate portfolio. You're an author. You're obviously a wonderful aid and consultant to your clients. You're making the world a better place. What's next in line for Mr. Hill?
Thanks, man. Well, I appreciate that. I think it's really our mission really is to help people to, on the educational side as well as with investments to achieve financial freedom through passive investing, through Main Street investments. That's really our mission. And I'm really passionate about it because I think that there's a lot of people that could be really hurt through Wall Street, and just what I've learned about fees and different things there. It doesn't really serve most people well. I think if you're wealthy and you want to maintain your wealth, it's okay. I mean, there's some things about it. You can kind of hold on to your wealth and hopefully hedge some things. But if you're looking to grow your wealth, it doesn't really serve people. I think. I mean, I have a pretty strong opinion there. But yeah, I think continuing to create in that space, continue to go after personal goals that I have, and really, just things that are important to me. Right. One of my big whys is working to end modern day human slavery in the world. I mean, there's 20 to 40 million human slaves today in the world. It's hard to believe, but it's more than has ever existed in the history of the world, and it will get worse. It's in every city, even in the U.S. And
Is that an actual stat? Is that a fact?
It is, yeah. It's crazy. I mean, between sexual human slavery, labor slavery, and something like only 1 or 2% of these people are ever rescued, and then it gets really messy because someone who is a victim, maybe for example, let's say a woman is a prostitute at a place. It's not by choice; she's forced to do that. For her to she'll say, hey, if I stay in doing this, I'm going to die. But if I become a madam and I recruit other women, then I can actually have an okay life, right? So then there's a real messy thing where it's kind of the victim becomes the victimizer, and it's just really messy. But again, I think life can be that way.
Right, so we know these crazy stories, internationally. We've all seen Liam Neeson movies, right? How prevalent is this in North America?
So everybody thinks of movies like Taken, and even there's a movie called The Sound of Freedom, and I think they're good movies to kind of bring awareness to it. I think it exists. It is very prevalent. I mean, it's crazy that you can, get on the internet on Craigslist, and within a couple hours you could have someone, if somebody's going for a sex whatever, they can get somebody in their house. It's probably somebody who's being forced to be there, or there's something they'll do. And then there's different strategies. They'll bring somebody across borders. They'll take their passport. Maybe they'll implicate them in a crime, so they can't go to the authorities. Maybe there's they'll get them hooked on a drug or things like that. And it's very, very prevalent. And so, but it's not something that's really talked about a lot. The people that I know that work in the industry, I'm involved with a group called International Justice Mission. I've done some trips with them, and it's just, you just see it. You just see what's going on in India. A big one is labor slavery. So they'll, and I might get into a story of how that works. And, people basically become indentured servants and just have no rights. And even the police are involved with keeping people kind of stuck. So I think it really exists anywhere. It also exists around things like the Super Bowl or big events where people, women will be brought in and for those type of events and things like that. And so it's just, there are a lot of things out there that people think, oh, it's just, I'm just going to a strip club, or I'm just watching porn, or I'm doing these things. But there's a lot of unethical and coercion that cause people to participate in those things, I would say.
Yeah, one of our partners is actually he works with Operation Light Shine, which goes out and tries to find these kids. And I didn't know about this until last year. Louis, we're in San Diego at Roland Frazier's event. Byron was sitting there. Listen to this number, and it blew my mind. Almost 500,000 children in the United States go missing every year. 500,000. I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way. That can't be right. How is this not being talked about all over the place?
Well, and one thing you mentioned too is, what happens, especially to girls when they're in the foster system, right? So that you got, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of girls that are in the foster system. Once they get to age 18 or 19, I mean, there's no one out looking for them, right? I think about, I have a daughter, and, just like Liam Neeson, like there's nothing I wouldn't do to protect her, to try to help, whatever. But the stories I've heard is there's nobody out looking for these kids, and that's the thing that, if you're a parent, it just breaks your heart. It's just like, you hear the stories, and there was a story I'll just share briefly, that this girl was rescued from North Africa, and it's just, she went through a bunch of trauma, whatever, and she ended up, they 15 years old, put her on the streets. They made them work the streets. A just brutal situation. And when this girl was rescued, she finally realized that the person rescuing her was not also a trafficker or somebody else involved in this. And with tears in her eyes, she said, well, why didn't you come sooner? And this woman had said, who's part of a rescue operation, said, well, we didn't come sooner because we didn't know you're here. But now that we know there are girls like you, we do everything we possibly can for this cause. And so I think it's like that for me. That was a turning moment in me where something my heart just broke and said, this is a cause that's worth living and dying for, because a lot of people do anything to be free, but they just can't be free. And so I think it's important we talk about it. And again, it's, once you see something like this, you can't unsee it. And so it's the stuff that really, will keep you up at night, or think about how can I get involved in serving. And I'm still figuring out how to do that. But I just think creating awareness on conversations like this is really valuable.
Bronson, you and Matt with these anecdotes, you guys are blowing my mind. I mean, as a father, it's like it shakes you to the core. Can you think of a way where the average Joe like us and the audience can help? It takes a village, right? So is there a way where we can contribute to try to help change this tide?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways. One is you can talk about have conversations like this. There's a group called International Justice Mission, which is doing work all around the world, advocacy to try to help people become free. I mean, a lot of different countries around the world. I've done some work with them. Another thing too is in your local city, in your local town, there is likely a task force or some work that's being done in this area. So get online and look for human trafficking task force, or look, for your county or for your area, or even call your local law enforcement and say, hey, I want to get involved in this cause. How do I do it? And they'll give you ideas of how locally you can get involved in it. Maybe you can create some awareness or posters or things like, hey, this is the things to look out for with human trafficking. And I think, again, the more humans, we're very innovative, right? We can solve just about any problem, but we can't solve a problem we're not talking about and nobody's aware of, right? So I think that once everyone says, hey, this is happening, this just should not be happening. And because this happens in the dark, it happens at night, it happens, and we're just not talking about it or seeing it. It takes somebody just saying, no more. Like this girl, it's not okay that someone, if it was my child, what would I do? Well, what if it was somebody else's child and they didn't have a parent? I mean, shouldn't I take, the whole love your neighbor? Isn't that person my neighbor? I mean, isn't that person, even though they're not my child, there's nobody out looking for them. So can I say, hey, maybe for this one child, could I adopt them, or could I do anything to just help get involved in their life? I think it'd be super powerful.
Matt, just for the sake of levity, I'm imagining for some reason Bronson doing his Liam Neeson impression and saying, I will find you and you will regret it.
I have a special set of skills and I will come and I will give you.
Real estate by day.
Yeah, exactly.
Hero
and that's one of the challenges with this too, is that we think of it like a Liam Neeson thing, but a lot of it is not as, it's messier and it's not as exciting and it's not as, but it exists. And that's the thing. If it exists, it's something we can do something about.
Yeah. Those stats, they blew my mind. And everybody I tell does not believe me when I tell them that. So I go Google it, and it's the first thing that comes up, and nobody can believe it.
Yeah, and it's been confirmed, multiple places. Not like it's not happening. It's happening. It's actually grown. It's getting worse, and it's getting worse. And that's why. And I think it's interesting too. I mean, you look at the sexual human slavery side. I know this is not a podcast. We're talking about social issues and stuff, but as it's a tough issue to talk about in a way that doesn't come across shaming, I guess, in a way. Because let's say a guy travels for sex tourism, or participates in some of these things, or whatever, and it's hard not to talk about it in a way that's like, hey, do you know this is happening? That maybe this person. I think a lot of people, they don't know that they're supporting this industry, but they are, by things like some of the sex tourism, and a lot of guy humor, so it's kind of locker room talk, right? Oh, let's go to a strip club, let's go to whatever. Well, you don't know if some of the stuff and some of the stories I've read, there is a lot of coercion that happens in stuff that seems kind of innocent, that no one's getting hurt, but you don't know, someone that's there, or porn that's on, you don't realize it. So, I just think it's hard. I haven't figured out a way to talk about it in a way that calls men out to say, hey, let's be men, let's be this kind of man, in a way that's not shaming, right?
Well, Bronson, I think the best way to talk about it is doing what you're doing, because ultimately, to try to move the needle on something like this, you need time and resources. And without time and resources, it's very difficult to move the needle besides just talking about it. So the fact that you're dedicating yourself to a very ambitious pursuit, both professionally as well as financially, gives you the tools to move the needle. So thank you for talking about it, and thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's something we need to talk about. So I'm super passionate if someone wants to connect on that.
Talk about government spending. They should be spending money on this instead of other things. I don't leave it at that. Bronson, thank you so much for being here again, brother. We really appreciate
Mike, Lou, great to be here. Thanks for having me back. It was a great conversation. Love you guys for sure.
Awesome. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on the socials?
So my name is Bronson Hill. So you can search me on all the socials. We're doing a lot of stuff online. Also, my website, bronsonequity.com. I've got the first couple chapters of the book. You can download it for free. It's also available at Amazon. And again, we have our investment club. If people want to hear about our unique deals coming up, I'd love to share about that. And thanks again for having me, man. It's been a lot of fun.
And get that book quick, because inflation being what it is, it'll be $80 soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Bronson, thanks so much for being here. Everybody, that's a wrap of the Liquid Lunch Project. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the show. And make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of The Liquid Lunch Project.